Nos encontramos con la profesora Veerle Draulans de la Universidad Católica de Lovaina, Leuven, quien es promotora principal del proyecto sobre violencia basada en género en las universidades ecuatorianas. Vamos a conversar con ella sobre su historia, cómo empezó a trabajar los temas de género, cómo inicia este proceso de colaboración con la Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar, pero a través de esta colaboración también un consorcio de universidades públicas, privadas, de posgrado y pregrado del país se suman a una red interuniversitaria para hacer investigación, formación e incidencia política en temas de género. Bienvenida, Veerle. Vamos a hacer esta entrevista en idioma inglés. Y quisiéramos empezar con un poquito de la información personal de nuestra invitada especial y sus motivaciones para trabajar este tema. So, who is Veerle Draulans?
Difficult question to start with, because it depends on which angle you would like to focus on. So I'm born and raised in Belgium, in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, really in the north. I grew up in a family with 4 children. I'm number 3 of the 4. I went to Leuven in 1977 and I did all my studies in Leuven, got my PhD in Leuven, a PhD in ethics. And then I was a teacher. My first working experience was as a teacher in secondary school, but after 2 years, the school as well, I came across the fact that teaching for secondary school students was not really my thing, that I would better work and have more nice work experiences when working with adults. So I moved to the women's movement, Catholic women's movement, where I started with a project, an empirical study, sociological study, as the movement wanted to get more information about the profile of their members. So, and there comes the link with gender already, despite the fact that it was there from the beginning, from secondary school. I was involved in North-South collaboration. And when you work about projects, North-South collaboration, you immediately also find information about women in the South, especially at that time. It was called the women's issue in the South. But it has, so then there was the women's movement I worked with, I collaborated with. And as soon as I got the opportunity to grow into an academic career, the focus was growing and growing more and more in the direction of gender studies. For example, ethics brought me to ethics of care, which is a field that is dominated by female academics, as care is linked with femininity. So it has more or less always been there as of the beginning of my career. But I must admit that the formal acceptance as a gender studies professor was not really an easy one. Because at that time, and that dates back to 1998, university was not really convinced that it was necessary to have a full-time professor in gender studies, and they were at that time also not convinced that the interest of people in gender studies would be a long-term sustainable project. So they started with a 10% admission in gender studies. And then bit by bit, but I had to find my own finances for the project, for the gender studies project. Bit by bit, it was broadened from 10% to 20%. So that's the history of gender studies in most universities. But in the end, the academic leadership and chairpersons and so on became convinced under pressure of female academics. Also the fact that at other international universities, gender studies was established as an important field of studies. So they broadened it and it became a respected position and a full-time position.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the trajectory.
Mm-hmm. And what has been like the most rewarding part of your job in gender studies and education?
It has always been the connection with people. When I look back to my career, what I'm most proud about is not number of publications. People ask me sometimes, what do you think about the number of publications? But I don't connect academic work by priority for myself with the number of publications, the whole discussion about rankings and so on. But I have the warmest feelings when I think about connection with people, people I met within the work context. It can be colleagues I could collaborate with in our own university, worldwide in the field of gender studies. But also, especially within the possibilities that Veerle West has offered me to collaborate with partners in Sub-Saharan Africa, here, Bolivia, Ecuador. Not only the academic partners, but also the stakeholders they work with. So I had the opportunity to meet people, women, very strong women, trying to survive, to get the best of their life for their children in rural areas somewhere in the north of South Africa, for instance. And when they were talking about their reality, that gave me a lot of, it made me humble, very humble, but also it gave me a lot of warmth, strength, belief in the strength of people despite the reality they are confronted with. So what the most rewarding are connections with people. And very often, of course, in my field, women.
Mm-hmm. And the most frustrating?
Academic life often leads to frustration, especially when you work in gender studies. So at the beginning of my career, as I told you, the frustration was about only getting 10% and the need to convince people that's an important field of expertise. The permanent search for additional funding.
Even in Europe, because sometimes we think that just happened here in North America.
No. It was a difficult start. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I didn't spend so much work in trying to find additional funding. So I got contracts of 3 years and then 5 years and then again 3 years and again I had to search for additional funding till in the end, finally, I got a long-term contract. But also frustrating us, the fact that gender studies is considered as a kind of niche in the whole of the university life, because people are searching, where do you belong? Are you really a sociologist? Or do you belong to arts, or are you a philosopher? And people reason in terms of the field you're graded in. But what characterizes my career most is the word inter, I always say. So I've been working interdisciplinary, inter-faculty, between schools, inter-university. So, but it's always the word, the inter. And precisely the inter makes gender studies a bit special, because people in academia are used to be proud of being an expert in a very precise and specific field of expertise. And inter doesn't fit in that design. And the fourth inter that characterizes my career is that I have always been balancing between academia, civil society, policy making, policy writing, and that sometimes I was wondering, do people consider myself as a real academic, or do they look upon me as someone who is too much involved,
like an activist?
Or policy advisor, or so. It was a bit of my struggle within academia to perceive myself as no, I'm a real academician, and it's perfectly fine to combine academic life, or to embed, that's the better word, to embed academic life within civil society, the questions that come across when you collaborate with stakeholders from civil society. And I must admit that working in the context of Veerle, I could notice that for people in low-income countries, or what was called sometimes the South, but that it's much more evident to embed academic research in the needs of society, and especially the needs of people who have most needs in society. It's not by coincidence that the Veerle baseline is leaving no one behind, or that we have collaborate with projects and PhDs that contribute to solve an issue somewhere in rural area or in urban area. But there is, by definition, this explicit link with society, and also the assumption that your PhD or your research would contribute to solve an issue. So what I learned by working within the Veerle context is that what I did from the beginning of my career in Belgium, because I had a strong link with Christian labor movement in Belgium and with the women's part of the Christian labor movement in Belgium, but that my links with civil society in Belgium didn't diminish being a good academic. While not everybody is really in academic life, not everybody is convinced that this is the best pathway. Especially sometimes people who are doing fundamental research in a very specific field of expertise are sometimes doubting about this link. And then the whole idea about objectivity and so on is behind.
It happens the same here. It's like a struggle, because what we call popular science or conscious science is not like qualified as science. So we are facing like the same struggles here in the Global South. And you were referring to these intersectionalities, inter-faculties. So from this inter-perspective, how do you understand gender?
Well, I always refer to a definition that I got from John Wallach Scott, who wrote that definition already back in 1986. And she has developed two parts in her definition. So it's about perception of differences between men and women, that's one. And the stereotypical behavior that comes with these perceptions, that's one part. But she adds a necessary second part of her, and that's about power relations. And gender studies analyzes the two dimensions, how these perceptions and power relations are related. So sometimes I need to convince people that gender studies doesn't want to diminish or reduce or the differences between people, because differences between people make society rich. But that the aim of gender studies is to analyze the consequences of these differences in terms of societal positions and power positions. And that's the focus. Differences are not a problem as long as they don't create unequal positions. Because differences give color to society and make society richer. But it's the power differences that we want to analyze. Mm-hmm. And that makes sometimes also people a bit nervous. Why should it always be about power? Or they feel condemned in their position.
But there are. So how did you become involved in this project of gender-based violence in Ecuadorian universities?
Well, perhaps it seems a bit strange to say, but because of my position in gender studies at KU Leuven, and I must say that of course, I'm not the only one who works about gender in Leuven. So from the beginning, we tried to convince colleagues in all faculties and all fields of expertise, all disciplines, that it would be good to include the gender perspective in their teaching, so that we would embed gender wherever possible in teaching and research. So I'm not the only professor teaching gender studies. Let's be clear about that. That's a good thing. But given how it all started and how the development of not only my position, but the development of gender studies in the university, quite some people associate gender with me. So when there is a kind of call or a press question coming from media or press, they often first contact me and ask me, well, are you interested this or that is coming? Or who can you refer to in case you cannot do it yourself? So that's how I became involved in the Veerle projects. And within Veerle it was the same, it was similar. As soon as there was a strong gender focus, they would contact me and say, isn't this something for you, given your expertise and the network? Because over all these years, I also could develop a kind of network within Flanders and broader, also internationally. And at a certain moment, Veerle asked me to be chair of their task force gender. So from the gender studies position at KU Leuven on, it grew out to a broader network. And yeah, I think it's because the word gender was in it that they first contacted me. And this seems to be something that for you that you could coordinate. So that was the start. But I collaborate with Veerle for many years already. So I think 2011 or 2010 it started.
So finally, what would you hope remain as a legacy of this project here in Ecuador?
Oh, what I could notice is you're close to my interests with this project, you know. What I could notice during these 2 years behind my screen, attending the Zoom meetings, but also yesterday, for instance, is the project is inter-university, it's inter-faculty, it's interdisciplinary. So it's really inter. That's a real strength. I think in academia, people sometimes struggle with the concept, but I have always considered that to be a strength, a very strong point. You're also in the relationships with the field, stakeholders, wherever. And then what I wish for you as project members is that you are able to continue the network that has been created thanks to the project. It can be an informal network, but I do hope that you can establish also a bit more of a formal network, so that you can continue to collaborate on a specific topic together, because I could experience that there's a lot of warmth and collegiality among the people in the project. And of course, what I hope for is that you also, or the various universities, can develop a good policy document, but not only a document that remains a paper, but a document that gets translated into measures, concrete measures, that each university in his or her specific context can develop. And so that there is a concrete policy going on, and so that you can continue to work on this very important topic. But when I see the results, this project was so well in combining academic scientific work, because the way how the survey has been organized really fits the standards of survey work, of quantitative study, with questions that are living among people. And what I would like to add to end is that probably it would be a good or an interesting objective to start talks with male students about how they experience it to be a young man in contemporary society. Because I fear that we as women sometimes interpret how young men feel within society or behave, or why they behave as we see them behaving. So it would be interesting to know whether there is a part of uncertainty behind, or how they relate to all the images of masculinity they see on the internet and what it means for them. I think that this could also be very helpful.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much for your experience, your advice, your knowledge, and especially your commitment. And we hope to have you back soon here in Ecuador. And thank you everyone for listening, and well, see you soon.
Thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.